some of the women I work with have, some of their stories are unimaginable. There's a lot of acting out, and they're like, I mean, I know you say this about post-traumatic growth and you can help people, but can you really help a person like me? Like in considering what my husband and I have been through. And I said, I want to tell you about a result from my research project. And I share that and I say, I just need you to know, God can do anything, but even the research indicates that people who have had the most pain maybe also have the most opportunity for the greatest growth in life. And I actually do witness that in many of our clients.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. On today's show, we'd like to feature our director, Debbie Laaser, as she engages in a great conversation with Leigh and Steven Brown from the Unlocking Love Summit. They're going to delve into the very interesting topic of healing from betrayal trauma and experiencing post-traumatic growth. Here now is Debbie Laaser and Leigh and Steven Brown.
Debbie, I'd like to jump right in, if that's okay with you. We have some questions here. I know when we spoke last, you mentioned some of your work on post-traumatic growth, and I know you've published work on this, and you've done a lot of work around it. The phrase in itself shifts the narrative a little bit towards one of hope and healing. Would you expand on that for our audience?
I would love to. The word itself kind of explains what it means, which is post or after you have experienced something traumatic in life. There is the opportunity, if you have resources, to actually use the pain that comes from that to grow. And I love the concept because I think early on in my own recovery, which was not my recovery, but my husband Mark's and mine joining him as a spouse who had been betrayed. We were in treatment together and counseling together over 35 years ago. It was new at that time. There wasn't a lot of help. And yet I think we've come to believe that God led us to some amazing help at that time. And maybe he had a plan too, which is why I'm doing today what I'm doing, and Mark has for many years before his passing 5 years ago. But all that to say, when I ran across post-traumatic growth and all the research that had been done with post-traumatic growth, I really felt like somebody had walked into my life and said, this is what you've been experiencing all these years. You just have never had the name for it. And I would just say that's really true, because with the wonderful help that Mark and I had, we were able to see fairly soon. Now, this doesn't mean that all the pain was gone or all our need for help and counseling and all that didn't go on for many years. But right from the beginning, when I was introduced to the amazing counselor I worked with, and Mark did too, in their counseling center, I felt like things were shifting in me. I was becoming alive in a different way. Mark and I were able to talk about things we had never talked about before, to know each other in ways that were also very new. And again, I'm not saying we did that perfectly, and we had these resources right there when things, crashed, or we had an argument or whatever. We had resources immediately available to us to help us move through. But to fast forward a bit, when I went back to graduate school to earn my degree in marriage and family counseling, that's when I really began doing the research that I was asked to do for my thesis. And I ran into all this idea of post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth has been studied for quite a long time, since the middle 1990s, by two professors at the University of North Carolina by the name of Tedeschi and Calhoun. They had done a number of research projects with other traumatic life events like war victims, sexual abuse, terminal illness, loss of a loved one. There are many traumatic things, natural disasters. We're seeing that all the time now in the United States anyway. They were putting together an inventory that they created about how people might be growing if they had resources through these difficult situations. And what they consistently found was that there was growth. And so I asked them if I could use their inventory and create a survey, a research project with women who had been in relational betrayal situations. And they agreed to let me do that. So I did. And in 2017, the final research came out on that. If anyone's interested in reading more about that, it's on our website, which is faithfulandtrue.com under resources and articles. But what I loved about eventually my research project was that we were finding the same results that Tedeschi and Calhoun had experienced with their participants in their surveys that they had led. And that was that, generally speaking, at around a year, and specifically around a year and a half and two, there were a lot of symptoms of growth that all of these women were experiencing. That gave me great hope and reminded me that what I had been through and how I had been through that with Mark was really valuable, and I think also missing from many women's lives, which is why maybe they continued to struggle for so long or weren't feeling the benefits of peace and joy, which I believe is what God wanted for all of us in these difficult situations. And in fact, what I especially appreciated about my work with post-traumatic growth is that it is so biblical. There are any number of places in the Bible where we're told we will have trials, we will face adversity and problems in our life, and yet God wants to use those to help grow us up and to not leave us incomplete in anything. I think James 1:2-4 is one of my favorite verses. If you want to get the more exact verbiage of that, I'm not always the greatest at perfectly stating that, but I knew that my faith journey as well as my clinical journey were all coming together, and post-traumatic growth became very much how I practice, and those in our practice are also living on that hope and experiencing the growth and the transformation that comes from really marrying the idea that despair can be a part of all of our lives and transformation can be also. I think it's the marrying of those, or the merging of those two ideas, which also helps us merge the two primary types of recovery for betrayed wives anyway, the older addiction model, which was certainly in place when Mark and I were in treatment back in the 80s, the 1980s, initiated by Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's the founder of the field of sex addiction, and also the 12-step work very much would have any of us working on our own lives, what we can look at, what we can change to be better. And I think it's really solid in that it longs for us to work through difficult things and know that life could be better even when we face trials. However, I think along the way, there was maybe too much emphasis on the growing part for all of us in pain and not so much listening to the pain and the trauma. And thus, the second model that is very well known these days is the trauma model. And I believe that's a great model too, because it is recognizing that we need to address all of the trauma that we've experienced from any of our adversities, especially betrayal trauma. And we need those people who can listen to us and validate it. And we need to know we're not crazy because we're feeling things in our bodies. Our minds are telling us all kinds of crazy things about probably our spouses and ourselves and the world. And many of those are not true. And it really does take consistent help to work through some of that. And yet it's very much a part of our lives. So post-traumatic growth is this wonderful merging of both of those models, I believe. It lets us feel the pain and not miss the growth. And I believe that's, in essence, what we will do as clinicians to give our clients hope through these difficult times. So I don't let any client leave my office or a virtual Zoom session in a first session without hearing the hope I have for them, no matter how hard it is. And I do remind them that just waiting silently or alone for things to change is not the way we work ourselves to transformation in our lives. We really do need some of these resources, like full disclosure, knowing what has happened so that we can grieve our losses. And we need community of other people who have worked through these issues. And we need spiritual direction through this, because on our own, it seems like we may have done what we could do to try to affair-proof our life, or to not have some of these difficult things show up, and yet they still do. And we might wonder why in the world that happens when we've just tried to be good people or follow our spiritual journey in life. So these things are very important to put in. And finally, resource-wise, we need someone to help us with cognitive restructuring. That refers to the beliefs we carry about a lot of things, including the trauma that we're going through, excuse me. I know you had mentioned that you love the part you and I had talked about, Leigh, the other day, about what I found in my research about what our thoughts or our distorted core beliefs, how do those play a role in the pain that we experience from difficult things? What we found, because I merged the work also of Calhoun, who had done an inventory on the belief systems that we have and how they are shattered when we go through difficult things. We often understand that when we take something like a traumatic life experience with our environment, let's say we're facing the huge Hurricane Helene here this week, and all the damage it's done for our cities in the Southeast, and many losses of life. And there be maybe some of us that are creating a lot of beliefs about that, like, well, it's only going to be a matter of time before, I'm going to be in one of those, or surely the life, our world is going down the tubes because, so many things are not being taken care of in terms of our environment. Or we could believe a lot of things, or I would never survive something like that. I just don't think I would have the strength to do that. But we come up with beliefs about things. And when we're talking about betrayal, trauma, some of the consistent ones that I hear are usually personal first and foremost. Like, I must not have been enough for my spouse to prevent him from doing what he's doing. It's a huge core belief about who I am. And yet I find that for almost 95% of the women I work with, that's oftentimes where their minds go also. We may start believing that we could never trust our spouse again, ever, no matter what kind of help we have. We may believe that our life is ruined at this point. We may believe that our life has been a waste. We may believe that our spouse is been totally hypocritical in our life. He's not anywhere near the person he was when we married him. There are a lot of these beliefs that, when all is said and done, and there's some help to look at what is true eventually, almost all of them shift in terms of what is true. My research project proved really that the more shattering we had of our beliefs, in other words, the more of those beliefs that came up when we were traumatized, the greater the pain we felt. It's really our thoughts that create our emotions. It's very interesting to think about that. And it makes sense when some people haven't had as many of the shattering thoughts. Maybe for them, it's a second marriage and they haven't lived that long with a person. And maybe what they know is that their world hasn't been ruined. They've had a good life, and maybe they lost their first husband and this is a second marriage or whatever. But when our beliefs are different, it also allows our pain to be different. And that was definitely recognized in the research that we did. And it's why we find it so important in our clinical work with clients to help them with their belief systems. And as I call it in my latest book, to help them update those along the way. Because a lot of times we're living with some very outdated core beliefs. And once we begin to look at what's true today, we know that we need to update those. I just talked to a woman recently who said, you know, what's strange is when my mom and my dad faced their own infidelity issues, and my mom stayed in the marriage, I sat down with her and I said one day, as a 22-year-old, if this ever happens to me in my marriage, I will be gone. No two buts about it. I'll be gone. And she said, now, isn't it interesting? I'm sitting here talking to you today, and actually, we have been through this, and I'm still here. And actually, things are going very well for us. We've gotten a lot of help. And I would have never thought that I would ever be in this place. So it's a great example of how she's updated a belief of hers. And I know that's true for many women, that they often think that if this happens to other people, but if it ever would happen to me, man, I've got my boundaries clearly established and I will be gone. And yet other things happen, and they maybe meet other people, or they hear other possibilities, or they hear the truth about post-traumatic growth, and they're like, well, maybe it would be worth a try to give it a chance. So at any rate, one of the other things that came out of the research project that I just love is that those who experience the greatest shattering of their belief systems, and thus they would have also experienced the greatest pain, or as we would call it, post-traumatic symptoms, or even a disorder, PTSD. And yet, with that happening to them, what we also found was the huge correlation that the more pain there was, the more growth there was. Now, that's pretty amazing to me. And it also reminds me that some of the women I work with have, some of their stories are unimaginable. You know, there's a lot of acting out, and they're like, I mean, I know you say this about post-traumatic growth and you can help people, but can you really help a person like me? You know, like in considering what my husband and I have been through. And I said, I want to tell you about a result from my research project. And I share that and I say, I just need you to know, you know, God can do anything, but even the research indicates that people who have had the most pain maybe also have the most opportunity for the greatest growth in life. And I actually do witness that in many of our clients. So I've been going on and on. Obviously, I have a lot of passion for this. So I'll take a breath and see.
No, I've just been listening to you, just like that. Everything you said is so amazing, and I can go in 100 different directions with that. What came up for me when you're talking about I mean, you were talking a little bit about both sides, but like, primarily with the betrayed partner, that, the restructuring of those core beliefs. But I know that you also do that same work with the betrayer.
That's right.
What kind of beliefs have you seen shift? Like, what's that primary shift look like for you, and the growth opportunities on that end?
Well, we work with a lot of men who come to our workshops every month. In fact, we just started one today, which is probably where I got my times all mixed up with you guys. But at any rate, what we know are those core beliefs that they carry also, generally speaking, from very early life woundedness, are also ones that hopefully with help and with affirmation and with experiencing life differently for themselves, they begin to change for them as well. One of those, for instance, is if you really knew me, you would hate me and probably leave me. What's true is when you carry a belief like that, there is no doubt that you're going to start hiding and lying about things, because your belief is that you will lose people who you love in your life. And chances are the woundedness you're bearing has come from experiences where that happened a long time ago. And that belief got implanted in you as a young person. And it probably was exacerbated over the years with more and more experiences that also led to you like, yep, I tried to tell my best friend this and they thought I was nuts. And so, they've never been in my life since, or whatever. Core beliefs are definitely what drives someone to live with a lot of pain. Remember how I said core beliefs, the more you have and the worse they are about who you are as a person and what the world is like and how they might treat you if you're authentic and you share with the world what's true about you. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are judgmental and they're advice givers, and they want you to keep changing and be like this and not like that. And we don't find the world to be that safe oftentimes. And so those who have had woundedness and carry these beliefs about themselves are also in a lot of pain. And when they're in a lot of pain, they're looking for ways to manage that. And sexual acting out is one of the ways that works, quite frankly. It's just another way of coping. For any of us who have done a lot of work on how we manage our own pain, we will begin to see that we all have some coping mechanisms. We do, because life is painful. There's none of us that gets through this life without running into some hard things. Some of us run into a lot harder things. And so when those really hard things are also married or associated with some kind of a sexual solution for the moment, that then gives you some relief, and that feels good. And that's what your brain remembers and your body remembers. And so as you grow, and without any help to change those belief systems, what will happen is when you get triggered into one of them, you will go back to the same solution that worked for you, even as a young person. Very important to understand these associations. In kind of a lighter note, I know I share with people, thankfully, I didn't have a lot of abusive or abandoning woundedness in my life, although my husband did. But what I remember is sometimes my folks would drop us at the grandparents while they did some traveling. And I was very lonely, as a child could be. And I knew my folks were coming back, and I was still lonely. But my grandmother always made homemade cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning. And I remember that smell as I was getting out of bed. And I remember getting to have some of those for breakfast, and they were right out of the oven. And even today, when I feel particularly lonely, one of the first things I think about is Danish and cinnamon rolls. And that's the same concept of making these associations for things that work for us. And so what I want to say is post-traumatic growth is for everyone. It is definitely for the men we serve. When they leave and they connect to all of their resources as well, they start letting go and updating those old core beliefs about themselves and others. They start loving who they are because they're living authentically, even if that means some people might leave them. And that's okay, because, it's impossible to let everybody like us at all times. But I think with a faith journey and knowing that's not so important as pleasing God with your life and becoming the person He wants you to become, that there's all the hope in the world that it will be a very different, transformed life for him and also for his spouse if she chooses to join in this journey. And I'm happy to say that's what we see pretty regularly at our center. And I love the fact that we are able to carry that hope for them.
So beautiful. So part of your vision and your journey has been to build this team up of people that are really embodying this transformation, and then they're able to, teach the next crop, the people who are going through the suffering.
Like that.
How has that grown and matured for you, and when did that really become a passion?
Well, first of all, my husband and I had to work through our own journey, and Mark was a pastoral counselor. He had a Ph.D. in the field, and so it was particularly hard for him to crash and burn from his own addiction. And he really thought his life was probably over in terms of being in this field and working in more of a clinical setting. However, what we found is that it wasn't over. And, again, I hope I'm not being too spiritual here for some, but God continued to bring situations and invitations for him to work with men who were struggling. And this was so long ago that what I'm saying is there wasn't much help really that was named as help for sexual addiction, and certainly very little for spouses. So he began to return to the field specifically to work with men who were struggling. And that was a safe place for him. He was able to do that despite all his consequences over time. And I was still working at the time in my own life of running a company with a friend of mine, which we don't need to get into. But all that to say, that grew and grew until it was clear that I was also being led to join Mark full-time, although I wasn't trained in the field. So I went back to graduate school to acquire my master's degree in marriage and family counseling. And then Mark and I joined each other, and at that point started doing a lot of couples work, as well as I worked with wives, he worked with their spouses. We developed intensive workshops for both of them separately and couples intensives for them together. So we put together really a program at our counseling center that was exactly like the kind of help we received and worked so well for us. And that was really our initial goal. And it was very simple because it was primarily Mark and myself. And then we started growing and the phones were ringing and people wanted to come. And we realized the people who we believed could help us the most were the ones who had been through our center and had found transformation for themselves and were very interested in coming back and working with us. And so we began slowly to add some of those folks to our team. I mentioned briefly that Mark passed away 5 years ago from cancer. And what I know is as we were getting older on in our years, I'm not going to say any age, of course, but if you want to put together all my math and what I'm saying, you know that we're getting up there. And Mark always said, my great vision is to train up the next generation for what we're doing. And while we were doing good work, there still weren't a lot of us in our center. And I think after Mark passed away and I've been kind of at the helm of our company, what I realized is that people were just starting to come to me saying, I really want to work with Faithful and True. And what I found was these were the people who had been through our program, 10 or 15 years ago, and they were finding all this change in their life, and they too wanted to share it with others. And oftentimes they had already gone back to school and gotten their degrees and were prepared clinically to work with people. And so I started to slowly bring them on board. And so, today we have nearly 18 people on our team that help lead groups and see individuals, and our small group leaders at our intensive workshops. And I can't help but believe Mark is there smiling down on his vision and mine as well. But who would have ever thought, and especially in my years of grieving that, I'd be given the strength and the people that are just coming to me asking to be a part of it. So I feel very blessed, and I have a lot of joy, even though it's different kind of joy than doing this with Mark. And I think that's sometimes what transformation looks like. It's just a change. It's also good. It's just different.
I love that you touch on that, and it's been a big part of our journey also is to try to do, even with the summit, is to just reach out, things that we're finding, things that we're walking through, and to try to, share our experience and help anyone who might be coming up, through the similar kind of experience. And I feel like once you sort of have that experience of the transformation and seeing that potential, you're sort of moved in that direction to want to share.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of this natural outpouring. I'm not surprised that people are coming back to you saying like, sign me up, because it really is, it's shocking that you can experience, this kind of freedom, liberation, transformation in light of something that is so painful. And almost like you were saying, precisely because it was so painful.
That's right.
What becomes available to you is something that then you kind of want to give it away, to others and share. Yeah. So yeah, I can see that growing up around you.
Yeah, it's not part of our human nature, is it, to think that something that's so painful could eventually lead us to something so good. It's why I really believe this is in its essence a spiritual journey. There are just a lot of things that I believe start transforming our character and our beliefs, again, updating our beliefs about things as simple as when do we accept that we personally can't do anything more? It's time to surrender and see what God's great plans are going to be for this. And it's often when that happens that we start seeing some great movement. And I think that's part of how our team grew, really when I was grieving so desperately after Mark died, it was just like, God, I don't know what you want to do with Faithful and True or me at this point. He was our leader. He was the guy that was out there all the time. I was more of a behind the scenes kind of person. And I said, whatever you want for us, I will wait and see what happens. And then COVID came, and who would have ever thought we could survive COVID? And yet our team, they just came in like those quarterbacks that are brought into the game after the main guy gets injured, and they stepped up and they figured out how to do our workshops virtually. And of course, we all began to counsel virtually. And I mean, everything was working. And I'm like, well, this certainly is not of me. This is not. And so I just think the spiritual growth is amazing. And that is one of the components of PTG, post-traumatic growth, is that there's a sense of being stronger yourself. There are richer relationships in your life. There's a greater spiritual journey for you. There's generally renewed opportunities in your life, which is probably what you're seeing, I bet, Stephen, and Leigh, is that the pain of this, I mean, here you are leading a summit virtually, and that's a really great thing. And so I think those elements of post-traumatic growth are seen as great relief and joy in our lives, more so than maybe we ever experienced.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to touch on what you said, the opportunity that gets created and the new opportunities to experience real peace, real joy, and to kind of like take away the shades that have been kind of blocking us from seeing the truth about how we're living. So like it's unfortunately for us, it has taken a very traumatic experience to do that. Maybe not everybody does have to have such a traumatic experience to kind of take the shades off. But if you're here with us today, that was probably your experience as well. And I've absolutely loved everything that you've touched on and said today. And before we go, is there anything else that's on your heart or on your mind that you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Well, mostly I want to leave people with hope. There's nothing too despairing that can't be used to grow you up in some way, particularly your character and becoming the person God calls you to be. And I would say that sex addiction in Mark's and my lives was so difficult. Three small children, very similar in ages to yours right now. And I wondered how in the world we'd make it, and we did. And there have been other traumatic things in my life with children and other things that have happened. But the most traumatic thing has really been losing my husband at an age when, we were just really enjoying a lot of travel, a lot of work together. And I have a lot of questions. And I imagine a lot of your listeners do too. Why didn't God stop that? I mean, here was a man serving him in ways I don't know very many others have been. And so I have a lot of questions. I've had some anger, and thank goodness I keep thinking for all the things I learned through the earlier years of moving through addiction, because all of those things have helped me also to really first survive, but now thrive being a widow. And so we never know what life's going to give us, but I do know God doesn't waste our pain. I clearly know that in my life. And I also know that there's room always for growing closer to the Spirit and how the Spirit leads us, and also to our dependency on God instead of, I think pride is one of the worst things we all have, and that self-sufficiency, which at times is a good thing. I'm glad I know how to do a lot of things, frankly, practical things. And yet I think there's a point when we do learn how to surrender and not assume that we won't know how to fix some of this. And we need others. We need others in community with us. And in some ways that I think is how God serves us, through other people who can be there for us as well. So I hope you carry hope. I hope you look for the resources you need. Particularly, I hope you don't let yourselves be alone in the journey. as my husband said about men that came to us, isolation is the worst enemy for getting healthy. And I would say the same is true for partners. Isolation and staying alone, thinking you're protecting your husband by not talking about things or whatever it is that keeps you in the corner of your house. It is the worst thing for trying to get well. So whether your marriage survives or not, which depends on a lot of things, particularly whether your spouse is working his program and getting well and getting sober, which, by the way, we totally believe is possible. It's not about that so much as is about there's well-being waiting for any of us if we seek it.
So beautiful. And thank you for being part of that community, for us and for anyone listening. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And I wish you the best in your summit.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. We hope that today's subject and discussion was beneficial to you. We'd also like to invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many free resources available to you. There's over 550 podcasts like this one, as well as our online bookstore and all of the online information and registration for our 3-day intensive workshops. If you are a man that is struggling with sexual addiction or unwanted sexual behaviors, you'll want to look into our Men's Journey Workshop, which we offer every month here at Faithful and True. All of the information about that workshop is on our website, as well as the information about our Women's Journey Workshop and our Couples Journey Workshops. We hope that you will take a look at our website and see if the resources that we offer can be beneficial to you. Until then, we hope that this coming week for you will be filled with many blessings and with great vision.